Welcome, everyone. My name is Tor Salij, and thank you so much for joining us at our ongoing SAP Business Technology Platform Customer Value Network series. Today, we're bringing you improved results with integrated financial applications. We have a great agenda lined up for you today with my colleagues, Michel Heesendanks moderating. He's from the global solution. He's a global solution owner for the FP&A. My colleague Suraj Shah, core finance and enterprise performance management expert. Lars Flemingard, senior solution advisor, CFO office, and Simon Lewis, head from our partner Clarivas, and finally my colleague Chris Van Delm, global cluster lead for planning. They're going to be covering challenges facing the finance department, and then you'll have some conversation with the experts, talking about customers and their implementation and what was successful. What is the benefit for you as a customer? And what is the impact of using business content and pre-built accelerators? And finally, an analysis of what was shared, mainly around S4 finance and financial planning. And finally, a call to action and with some Q&A mixed in. Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know of our other upcoming webinars where we have an ongoing SAP, the universe of SAP Business Technology Platform in a nutshell. We have a 12-episode live YouTube streaming. We're already on episode 9. So if you're interested in joining us, basically this takes you from the A to Z of BTP. Also on November the 8th, if you're interested, we have a session around customer evolution from SAP process orchestration to SAP integration suites. If you're interested in joining that, I'll put these links in the chat as we move forward. And finally, for those in the Chicago area, if there's anybody on the call from the US, we have an on-site event set up on November the 10th. For those in Europe, in 2023, we have events in Heidelberg as well as Madrid. For those who are in those cities or in anywhere nearby that like to join us on site, we will have those in 2023. As part of the Customer Value Network, you guys are all plugged into our main hub of news and updates, one of which is the SAP Garage series. We are already on episode 12. Our next session will be on December the 7th, and pretty much the Garage series gives you a little bit more hands-on enablement and expert guidance, where each of our episodes is focused on one SAP Discovery Center mission. For those who don't know what the Discovery Center mission, this is a great opportunity and session to join and to understand what are the benefits of using the Discovery Center. If you're interested, I'll also put the link there. And finally, as our, in terms of helping you and giving additional resources, there are numerous other forums that you can join: the SAP Fiori Practitioners Forum, the Business Technology Practitioners Forum, and finally, the most recent one, the SAP Process Automation Practitioners Forum. So you can join any one of these and get latest information ahead of the main events such as Sapphires and TechEds. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Michel to lead us through the next couple of sessions. Michel?
All right. Thanks a lot, Taurus, for the intro and for introducing us. Nice to be here in this virtual round with all of you, and especially also love to be here with Chris, Lars, Suraj, and Simon. You'll get to learn much better in the coming 1.5 hours, I would say. I'm sure, because they have a lot of interesting stuff to tell. And let's say what is this all about is basically about the role of FP&A. That's the goal of today. Let's say the challenges we're facing. And just as a small anecdote, 2 weeks ago, I think I was in the center of Brussels, joining up with around 20-25 CFOs and heads of controlling or FP&A professionals, as either, let's say, more modern way called these days sometimes. And basically the whole evening was around this, basically one topic. Everybody was let's say talking about the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic, the war which is going on, which is impacting the entire world, the whole inflation bit. Oops, somebody seems to be coming up in the background, don't worry. the whole inflation, the energy prices in some parts of the world. So basically we see that, let's say, there's a lot of, let's say, hurdles impacting the way a lot of companies are doing business. Just last night, I saw on the news that, let's say, about 800 companies in one specific country are, let's say, closing their doors temporarily because of, let's say, the rising energy prices and because of the impact on, let's say, on the whole economy. So I guess we're all clear that, let's say, the last 3 years have been showing us in a like kind of a super speedy way, let's say, that what we've been talking about for 10, 20, maybe even longer years, that basically we need to change like the role of finance and especially FP&A professionals to become more and more the business partner is really becoming more and more important and urgent. And let's say because of a lot of companies, well, trying to react to all of those crazy changes which are ongoing through installing new business models, through, let's say, changing the way, in other words, let's say, they go to market. If you look at the evolution from product companies to more subscription and service type of businesses, basically, it really changes the way they, let's say, their revenue streams are modeled, their way their profits, let's say, models are, let's say, should be analyzed and adapted. Same thing from a supply chain perspective. I think we've all probably also in our private lives seen a lot of, let's say, supply chain breaks in the last couple of years in all kinds of different sectors. Let's say how to react on that is really crucial. So that's a nice example of, let's say, how we really need to take into consideration, let's say, the operational drivers, which are really key, and then basically see how we can translate that into financial modeling. And last but not least, I think we all also see now that sustainability and ESG overall is becoming much more important recently, and that will only increase. So that's all elements which, of course, every controller, every FP&A professional, every finance professional, and actually any business professional at large should be taking care of. And that's basically not only a technology piece, that's also related heavily to, let's say, the way people see their roles, the way processes are being put together. So this, let's say, this triangle of people, process, technology, and let's not forget, let's say, the fourth element of data, and let's say the quality of data and the data modeling behind. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today with, let's say, Chris van Dam, Lars Flemmingaard, and Suraj Shah, let's say, which are colleagues of mine from SAP. But I'm really happy also to have some real life experience with Simon Lewis-Head from Clarovos, who's going to join us. And basically, that's more enough to basically set the scene. I really would like to, let's say, kick off with a question, let's say, to if I may, let's say, just be candid and direct it to Lars, let's say, to kick off. But of course, let's say, anybody else, please chime in to also add your view on it. So basically, Lars, to wake you up, let's say we see that, let's say, all of these changes are happening. We see also that the need to react faster and faster and evolve into an event-based approach is really high on the agenda. And let's say, from your perspective, what are the indicators for, let's say, this event-based approach? How can we make this happen? And what does this mean from a process perspective for, let's say, from an FP&A side, of course, of things? So could you shed some lights, let's say, to get into the details on this?
Absolutely, Michelle. Thanks. So what we are doing is to look into a different kind of CFO surveys, and in some of them we see a clear indication around monthly cycles, and that the controlling side of the house would like to go away from monthly closing and consolidation cycles, so towards an events-based approach, and being able to analyze in parallel the intercompany margin with the group margin without transfer price markups. Another indication that we see is from our customers. So we have a number of customers that really wants to go for this event-based approach. And going forward, we want our customers to be able to steer the entire material and activity value flow in real time. So automated and consistently at various levels for the legal entities, business units, and the group. And the objective here, important, is to optimize where we source, produce, and sell as cost effective as possible to maximize the financial performance. And what we see that corporate controllers are struggling with today is to have a consistent and uniform view of group margin and cost of goods sold. And it's not just about to get the financial rights. In the logistics processes, to get a full visibility into the value chain, we do need to record all the material and activity flows. And that is exactly what we are doing in the latest releases of our S4 systems. And I think to have this full visibility into the value chain, I think that is a rather good opportunity for CFO and finance organizations to take that insight, go out to the business areas and support them as a proactive business partner. Back to you, Michelle.
All right, thanks a lot, Lars, for for painting this overall picture. Can you could you double click in on this and let's say give a practical example, perhaps, let's say on some of the elements, let's say how we make this real, let's say, of course, from a technology perspective, because that's what we are experts in at SAP.
Sure. So let's take a very simplistic example. So we have a local sales office that sells to a customer. The producing company delivers the goods directly to the customer or via a central warehouse. So here, a standard sales order can initiate the entire process, which is as integrated into the value chain monitoring framework to orchestrate, monitor each process step. And here, the intercompany sales orders, intercompany purchase orders, and the billing documents are created instantly in real time. And when this happens, these transactions goes, of course, real time into the finance part of the S4 system and all the way to the corporate results. So here the real-time financial consolidation comes into place, where we do the intercompany eliminations instantly on the fly. And this gives the opportunity for the group controllers during the period to analyze legal and corporate margin in parallel.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Well, at least for me, that's interesting, let's say, to hear. I hope it's the same for, let's say, the audience, which is joining us today. Maybe let's say to, well, because we've been focusing on let's say, the real-time activity and the evolution of towards event-based processing. Now, let's say the other element which we hear a lot about and we get a lot of questions about is basically the whole impact of changing business models. In the perspective of, let's say, how to drive your business and how to financially do your business steering. What do you see as important, well, areas that are impacted by, let's say, this change of, let's say, business models? Could you shed some lights on that, and like feel free to add some comments also, the other guys on the call, or some particular examples. But yeah, back to you, Lars.
Yes, I think as we all see, in many industries today, there is an evolution of business models, new ones and modified ones. So going from a product-oriented model to a subscription model or everything as a service kind of model. And that means that we will have parallel business steering and information models, and that will, of course, increase the complexity into our financial and business steering processes. So the business model describes how you would like to do business with a certain part of your business. The steering model describes how you would like to steer that part. And the information model that shows you what information will be needed to be able to steer as the way as you want. Another aspect of it is that you need to have the aggregation of the models at a certain level, and preferably do that via a harmonized data structure. Another perspective is the speed of change. Since many companies are using the evolvement of business model as a competitive advantage and strengths going forward, then other companies and organizations need to react much faster to this in the competition, and preferably be proactive and have to look ahead and have forward-looking information for the steering. And for finance, it's so important that we can scale fast enough in line with the business pace out in our organizations. Mm-hmm. Important perspectives are, oh, sorry, yes.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to interrupt you.
And a couple of important perspectives here, of course, is to align your steering processes to your corporate business strategy, your key business drivers and objectives and so forth. And also to have a driver-based approach. I think today it's not enough to look at KPIs because that's just an outcome. So it's so important that you use both leading and lagging indicators synchronized. So the leading indicators are your drivers, and the lagging ones are your KPIs as an outcome. So the drivers will show you where the result is being created and also why. And actually a good example of this is the planning part, the XP&A, extended planning analysis, where you connect your financial planning into your different kind of business and operational plans. And there you get your drivers into your financial planning. But that is a topic that Chris will talk about, my colleague, in a minute. But I think it's a rather interesting example. And also a very different, important perspective is that we do need quality assured and trusted data to be able to steer efficient within our steering processes.
You've been mentioning a lot of different elements. Let's say I've been noting a couple of them down. Let's say the data modeling, which is important, the speed at which we need to plan. But I'm happy to hear that, let's say, our corporate business plan, let's say a long-term plan, is still relevant, because actually that was one of the questions which I also saw coming up in this event 2 weeks ago. People started questioning, but of course, like I hear, let's say that there's still the need for long-term perspective, of course. But let's say the first element I'd like to deep dive on, and let's say then hand over to Chris, let's say, who's our expert in XP&A and planning overall. I can say, well, we've been hearing integrated planning and collaborative enterprise planning and driver-based planning for, let's say, so many years. And now basically there's this new term coming up, XP&A, extended planning and analysis, I believe it stands for. But yeah, let's say how does this really, let's say, how can we put this in practice? How can technology help us? And what's your take at it, Chris? Is this really completely new, or let's say, is it now finally like happening? Something which we've been talking about for so long. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Michel. It's an excellent topic, actually. It's not a very new term, so to speak. Historically, we've been looking at what we call financial planning and analysis, which is mainly driven by the finance departments, account-based typically, which also involves a lot of manual data collection from the various LOBs, and in turn is very time consuming, and it just highlights the disconnect between financial plans and the planning happening in the different LOBs, which doesn't provide a clear linkage between the operations and the financial outcomes in the end. And that has become ever more important and apparent since the COVID crisis started, and ever since we had one crisis after the other, so to speak. There's political turmoil, there's currently the energy and raw material prices that going through the roof, there's the inflation going on. So there is a clear need to have this agile, data-driven planning platform that keeps organizations competitive and also help them thrive rather than survive, so to speak. And this is exactly where XP&A comes in. I'm going to use the acronym. We used that at SAP. It's all about making sure that financial planning goes beyond the finance department, and the various LOBs are invited actually to these end-to-end plan cycle that goes from your, I would say, long-range strategic planning over your tactical planning into the different operational plans, say in supply chain, in HR, in finance, and so on. So it's all about getting a better visibility by the different teams, their performance. It's also about making sure data is unified across the different plan activities happening in an organization, and to spot specific opportunities, for instance, and also to make teams more enabled to think proactively. So this is what XP&A is in a nutshell. Now, how does it is put to motion in our world, so to speak, SAP? This is where SAC Analytics Cloud comes into play, because it's actually combining, on the one hand, BI or analytics with planning and predictive capabilities. So it allows to go across the different LOBs beyond the finance department. Of course, there's a tight integration with S4. I'll get back to that a little bit later. And it's really about not just looking at what has happened, which is more about how can we do real-time reporting based on actual sitting in S4, for instance, but also in other operational systems. So it's about connecting these different data silos and break down these silos, running variance analysis, having the self-service in the hands of the different business people, because that's what it's all about. It's more business oriented than it's IT oriented, and it's all about creating that business platform rather, or better, doing business planning rather than financial planning, right? So this about what happened, then also what could happen, meaning how can we infuse predictive and AI capabilities in our plan activities. And with that, we're looking at smart insights, we're looking at predictive scenarios without the need of being a data scientist, so to speak, okay? And then finally, there's a planning component that allows to do very visual what-if simulations, see the impact of driver changes on our different metrics down to our bottom line, making also sure that the different user communities are set up in a specific workflow so you can track what is happening and you can guide these different user communities throughout the various plan cycles, not necessarily only for finance. And also have that collaborative framework that allow co-workers to work jointly in completing their plan cycles. And also have the ability to work with different granularities because certain plan models may need more detail than others, for instance. So having that all integrated into the financials, because in the end, it will all flow back into finance. Once the plan is finalized, you may want to put it back into S4 to do the budget execution stage, for instance. So have all that linked together in what you could call a holistic business steering. Over to you, Michel.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So basically, to summarize what I heard, it's really about, well, let's say, making sure that we can connect the different drivers from different lines of businesses, operational planning, marketing planning, sales planning, HR planning, and so on and so forth. Let's say, which then at the end of the road, we all turn into finance. Basically, that's where the strong link between, let's say, the platform, which is providing all of that capability, SAC and S4, becomes important, right? With the direct integration, so that we don't, let's say, start living in two different worlds for planning and for actuals, I could simply state. That's one thing I heard. The second one is about, let's say, related to, you know, the event-based approach, the speed we need. Let's say, actually, I heard that there's a lot of, let's say, capabilities we provide, which are not necessarily a black box, let's say, with your predictive capabilities and embedded AI in SAC. That's really interesting. And then the whole collaboration piece, which is also crucial, let's say, just to make people work together in a very agile way. Is that a good summary? Or let's say,
yes.
All right. Okay,
maybe on
thanks.
top of that, if I can chime in more.
Absolutely.
And Suraj will talk about that a little bit more in detail, but also when you talk about that speed, the business content, that's also crucial, just to make sure that the structures, for instance, from S4 are aligned to what you plan on in SAC or in the HR realm, success factors, for instance. But again, in the end, it will all flow back into finance, making the finance department, so to speak, or emphasize their role as a business partner for the other LOBs.
Right. Now, one element which I'd like to, let's say, before jumping into the, let's say, the pre-delivered content, which actually is indeed also a question I wanted to, let's say, come up with and address to Suraj. Before going there, let's say, if you allow, let's say there's actually one question I think which will be burning on a lot of people's lips and on their minds. It's basically, well, you know, we have SAC, we have S/4HANA, basically it's connected, that's all nice. But let's say the difficulty typically is, well, what about my data foundation? Does this work? How can I create this? How do I handle that? Yeah, maybe back to Lars, let's say from your holistic controlling perspective, could you start comment on let's say on that aspect? Because I think that's probably like maybe less technology related, but let's say very hard, let's say, to get to across the organization. So can you comment on that?
Absolutely. So one very, very crucial perspective around this is, and it's so easy to sit here and say, and I know it's a bit different to do it in reality, is to have common, agreed, and documented definitions of dimensions and measures in place, and being approved by perhaps a chief analytics officer or similar that sits rather high up in the organization, because this is a cross-organizational boundaries topic. So that's why it's so important that you have the power higher up in the organization to approve this. So this is really the foundation for the trusted data to support the different steering and information models within your decision support processes. And also it's a foundation, of course, within your single source of truth. And speaking about that, utilize the data where it sits. That's what we're doing in S4. So if we are looking at logistics data, for example, we are reading virtually with SAC without moving any data. And we are doing the same within the S4 and financial consolidation with the group reporting. So reading directly, so when the corporate result is ready, you can immediately start with your management analysis and reporting, and reading with SAC and analyzing with SAC virtually with a so-called live connection. And so the system components, S4 and group reporting and SAC, are natively connected back and forth. So this is a very strong alternative to things. It's being built directly with S4 with all its granular data. Another perspective is, of course, to be agile, to adapt quickly to new information needs. And another aspect is, and I think this is very important, is to understand the business at enough granular level to analyze why the result is what it is. Because without that, you can't take any action. So if we are analyzing on too aggregated level, we don't understand why, and then it's hard to do something about it. So that is also a very important aspect of it. If we look a bit more closely into S4 and the finance data, the whole finance data sits in one place and it's harmonized. And that means that you have a seamless navigation between profit and loss, balance sheet, cash flow, and so forth. And all the finance data is stored at transaction level, what we in SAP call line item. And that gives you a very good flexibility when you're doing your analysis. So when you're asking for information at a certain aggregation level, in the behind the scenes, S4 is reading at the transaction level and aggregates to the level as you want. And of course, during your analysis, you can analyze dimension by dimension all the way to details with a very high flexibility. If we look at about the master data in S4, so the actual and the plan data use the same master data, not similar master data, but the same master data from corporate results to details. And this gives you a very transparent view at a single source of truth. And that will allow you, just as an example, to look ahead and use the actual data for predictions to be used in a predictive forecasting process, for example. And so to summarize a bit, in S4, you really get the full transparency from corporate results, business areas, all the way to details. And I think that is even more crucial with the involvement of parallel business steering and information models.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lars. Now, one thing which probably also pops up when hearing all of this, let's say with quite a few of the attendees of this call, is like, yeah, all nice. Let's say we have all of the transactional line item details. We have them in one place. It's a single financial truth which we can access. We basically can also access from the analytics platform SAC to start planning. That's all nice, but that's basically still not, let's say, kind of covering all of the ground of a typical, EPM approach in all terminology. Because the one thing which, let's say, is kind of missing is there, let's say, the group view. I know you already mentioned it, but and maybe this one can be addressed by Suraj. I know you're let's say, a big expert in the whole area of group financials and consolidations. So Suraj, let's say, how do we bring that piece in? Because like I understand, and I think a lot of people understand, okay, we have entity information, but now basically how elevate this to the group level? Because of course I would be especially interested in understanding where my group profit comes from. So how do we take care of that these days, Suraj?
Yeah, no, a very, very important question, right? So I think maximizing profitability is probably a big thing in any enterprise's strategy, right? Yes, we'll be talking about sustainability, we'll be talking about other things of how we're doing as an enterprise, but profitability will be at the forefront. Now, how I typically like to look at this is if you look at today's world and enterprises we work with today, and I was just having a discussion with the CFO for pharma organization recently. You have your core accounting processes in place. Now you may be connecting that, right, with in some way or form with your consolidation that happens. So when I talk about my general ledger and all my entities, how are they interacting with the group process? And from their view was where we're more or less connected because we load the data somehow, right? That's the first question. And then the next question for me was then how do you understand your profitability? So again, they're plugging in other things around it to try and then address, right? I can see my consolidated statutory view, but now to try and get to my profitability, I might either drop some things out in Excel, or I might need to extend my general ledger view somehow to be able to do that. Now, of course, within SAP, we've done a lot of innovation over the years around this, and maybe that's what I wanted to try and bring to life here. Some of the discussions from Lars around the data foundation, very, very important. An area around what Chris mentioned around XP&A, very, very important. And how do we bring this together? So my view is firstly, the data foundation. If we talk about S4HANA, it may be, yes, you have S4HANA in place and therefore your power of the universal journal and my financial view is there. I may have other systems that support that, and hence we have central finance to bring this together. So my core finance is now in place, and that's very, very powerful. With that, we now extend it within S4HANA with group reporting, which is now our financial consolidation capability within our core financial processes, and that's very, very powerful. So when I was talking to this customer where we talked about, oh, our data somehow arrived into consolidation. Well, that somehow is now not an unknown. It is live. It is continuous accounting as part of core GL into group reporting, right? Now that's good. That's my statutory view covered, and I'm happy with that. But that's not enough. If we now take an example of what Lars mentioned in the early part of our event-based side of things, and I have the sales order and I want full visibility, wouldn't it be powerful if as soon as my sales order arrives, it's in my universal journal of S4HANA. It's not just looking at it from a statutory perspective, but I have all the characteristics to understand what does that mean from a profitability and a management perspective as well. And if that information is flowing all the way to my consolidation layer, I am already seeing a lot more granularity from a management consolidation. I can get a lot more detail there, right? So that's the first thing. That's great. Wouldn't it be good now that I have a full view from my transaction arriving all the way to consolidated view? So the group can say, hey, this company has this powerful 1 million euro sales that came through, and I have full visibility of how it consolidated to group. If I can now share this information in real time with my XP&A processes, this is where we now start extending the profitability side from what is actually going to happen with this business. Because if I cannot start planning and forecasting in near real time, I'm always going to be behind in terms of what I'm doing. So what I'm trying to get to now is this connection that we have of S4HANA and Analytics Cloud with XP&A is very, very important. And I can now take my data as I need it on demand from my actuals into my XP&A process, and therefore supporting my financial planning cycle. And this could be down from entity level all the way through to group. So I can decide based on my process what data I need. And that's great. So my actuals are available on demand to support my XP&A. I then run the process around XP&A as Chris mentioned, doing my end-to-end financial planning, budgeting, and forecasting. But the great thing about this is I can also, as I plan, send data back to the S/4HANA process. So if my cost centers need to have a real-time visibility of my actual versus my budgeted and how we're doing, for example, from my purchase orders, I can start seeing that visual view instantly. So what I'm trying to get to here is, first of all, an end-to-end intelligent financial platform is very, very key. This is where core financial processes, working with our consolidated group level processes, and interacting very well with our XP&A processes as well, bring that intelligent enterprise view. And this is where I can start looking at maximizing profitability from down to entity level through to group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, at least. I hope it makes a lot of sense to everybody. Let's say to kind of try to summarize it in my own words. Like, yeah, this is basically just, let's say, getting away from a holistic one monolith application which tries to do everything, which basically was never possible. Like we had an ERP system in the past, which basically was loosely coupled to then an EPM application, which was trying to typically, like say, combine planning, consolidation, analytical capabilities. But there were even different data models in such an EPM application. I don't have to think far. Let's say even if you think about BPC, our own, let's say in our own portfolio, it's basically also, it was as usual, let's say, just like our competitive solutions following that stream. Now, basically, I see more a modular approach where basically we've injected the consolidation engine into our core S4, into the core ERP application, and we can then connect it to a holistic planning environment, which is basically not just, let's say, tailored to finance, but which is basically helping to really interconnect all of the different lines of businesses, as Chris was already, let's say, talking about now. So I think that's a fantastic evolution that we're going towards through at SAP. Now, of course, this might sound like, whoa, this is huge and it's going to take 20 years to get it implemented. But I don't remember, I think it was Chris or Lars who already mentioned that, let's say that we were going to talk about this earlier on. Let's say how to make this real. I think it's interesting to also look into, well, basically some of the accelerators that we have. So our content packages, which we basically have provided. So could you also shed some light on that, Suraj?
Yes. That's a very, very good point. Right now, how I typically see this is, as SAP, we have years and years of expertise sitting within our organization. And how do we leverage that to, first of all, look at it from a time to value for a customer, right? So how can we give you the fast start and how can you get you there? We need to give you a good roadmap there. And at the same time, it's around how do we share best practices, right? Because over the years, we have those within SAP, and therefore working with customers with that is also important. So that's where this approach has come from. And if you are familiar with Analytics Cloud, as an example, we have the content network where you can find the pre-delivered content SAP has, not just SAP, but also what partners are driving is available as well. So it's something important to note. Now, let me take one or two examples. We're talking about finance and XP&A today. So an important area of business content, as an example, is our integrated financial planning content that we have available, right? Now, why would that be of importance? Well, it's really a very important example of how we bring XP&A to life. So we might be talking about it from a perspective, well, I might want to be looking at just financial statement planning, sorry. So that's great, right? But it doesn't just work like that, right? You are doing a lot of work underneath there. And very often, I'm still talking to some customers right now, it's happening in silos, in spreadsheets quite often before it gets to an automation kind of scenario. So you might be doing product level planning. You might be doing sales and profitability planning. You might be looking at it from an OPEX and CAPEX side of things. What we do with this business content is we first of all bring all of this together with best practices on how to approach an end-to-end cycle. The integration and the connections of the different points of planning come together in the best practices. And therefore, you can then pick and choose for your enterprise as a customer, what do you need as part of a full cycle, right? So that's just an example of integrated financial planning. And it works hand in hand with S4HANA, so it has the live connectivity capabilities and best practices on how to approach that as well. So very cool. Very, very personally, I think it's quite a cool concept of what we brought to life, but also we keep innovating on it. So it's not just, hey, here we go, we've done it. Customers can start utilizing it. As new things evolve, we bring that to life within that. So second example I can just bring it right now is from a workforce standpoint, very important topic with most customers we speak to today. It is now talking about it from a strategic workforce perspective and operational down to that employee that's being planned and the detail behind that. So we've again brought in best practices around this, interacting with in this example with success factors, so the HR management systems as well. But you can now start seeing having this pre-delivered capabilities firstly gives you a fast start as you are jumping on this journey, and at the same time you can now start understanding what we mean by best practices because it's already part and parcel of that. So yeah, that's probably 2 examples I can give, but there's a lot more out there, so it's worth exploring that as you get onto the journey around finance and XP&A as we're talking today.
Thanks a lot, Suraj. Let's say for detailing that out, let's say, and making it practical with a couple of examples. Now, at the same time, I'm sure, let's say, with me, everybody, let's say, is clear about the fact that we could never, ever, let's say, deliver all of the planning scenarios which one would need, let's say, just out of the box as standard content. And even, let's say, in the areas where we provide, let's say, content, of course, well, like people might want to deviate because that's just part of the way they want to steer their business for their particular business in their particular area of the world, in their particular culture, in their particular industry. So there's always going to be, let's say, the need to adapt and adjust. And I think that's also nice, let's say, that it's just not baked in content, right? And actually that remark, let's say, kind of seamlessly brings me to, let's say, to Simon, I would say, who has been awfully quiet up till now. So, well, Simon, let's say again, hello, and happy to have you here. And let's say, I think, yeah, you might be even, let's say, basic amongst all of us, let's see, the best place to, let's say, make some practical or give some practical advice on, let's say, how we can now make this whole platform real. At real customers in real situations, maybe, let's say, taking advantage of, let's say, the fast time to value which we deliver with, let's say, the content, but at the same time, let's say, leveraging the combination of S4HANA, including group reporting and SAC, in order to, let's say, help organizations out there to drive their business in a better way. So, like, take it away. I think it would be awfully interesting to hear some, let's say, practical examples from your world, Simon.
Yeah, thank you very much, and yeah, thanks for letting me attend the call today. It is I've got lots to tell. We're very, very busy, and the interest level is huge in SAP Analytics Cloud, from very large organizations to small organizations. And that's one thing. It's opening up doors to SAP companies, but also non-SAP customers, because it is a very compelling story. Just a bit of background. I basically look after the SAC and group reporting delivery team at Claravos, and we've been in this space for about 20 years, and we do everything around reporting, consolidation, planning, and now I can say analytics, which is a change from where we were probably 10 years ago. I began life as an accountant, working for Nestle, British Airways and Shell. So I've done the planning and the consolidation, and then I've been working with SAP probably about 10 years. And it's probably a little bit, I'm talking about a journey today to try and explain what the customers, our customers are going through. But we were a BBC practice. So we were implementing on-premise, Excel-based, legacy-based, planning and reporting solutions. And really, what I wanted to share with you today, many of our customers, SAP customers, are moving away from these, from BBC. Some are keeping hybrid BBC with SAC. We've got, scenarios of that. But also, we're replacing SAC and competing with a Cognos and Tagetic and Hyperion, but really wanted to share this journey from Excel based, legacy based, on premise to the cloud. And it brings me nicely how we've changed. I think with the big lesson for me when I'm speaking to the customers is this is not an FP&A tool, which sounds, that's contrary. It is much more than that. I'm saying, and this is why I talk about a journey. We start usually with the Office of Finance because we're accountants. We talk to accountants, but we say it's a mistake if you're just buying this tool to do my budget. That's really underselling it. Not just from all of its planning capabilities, but I really see this as, and we hear about enterprise-wide, company-wide reporting solution, but that's what we believe it is. It's a platform for all, if it works, and it may not happen today, but in 3-4 years time, we sell it as a platform for all reporting, all analytics, all your planning, not just in finance, but this is when we move into FP&A across the business. So, and again, most of our customers are on the early stages of the journey. And, we're going in, we're putting in a budgeting tool, but then, the next stage is we're growing its use, with FP&A, doing sales planning, workforce planning. But, the next, people, I would say the third stage is exploiting SAC's capabilities around, predictive, for example, or, scenario modeling. And, customers are still learning that, but they're very excited. I think a big growth area is especially predictive outcomes. I think we're only really scratching the surface about predicting, customer churn, headcount churn, whether an invoice is going to get paid or not. So not just financial predictions, but predictive outcomes. And then finally, my goal is, and we've seen it with some of our smaller customers, and we're on the journey with our larger customers. The final stage is that, it's an enterprise-wide. It is the place where all the information is, all the planning is, and it's their enterprise-wide reporting tool. So that's how I see it over time. Now, now I just wanted to feedback some maybe lessons or impacts I've seen at our customers. And I hope, and these are real base scenarios. We've seen a move away from Excel reporting, without a doubt. Excel is still important and people are still using it, but to our surprise, and one of our customers we're working with at the moment, it's a hybrid BPC SAC planning scenario, but their chief exec and their CFO are using SAP Analytics Cloud, and they're interacting with it, not just running dashboards, but they've gone as far as using version management, so creating their own versions of data and actually using it more as a sandpit. And that, I'll be honest, that's taken us by surprise. The uptake of the more senior teams in using this as an interactive tool, it is there. And that really brings me on. The second is agility. I've heard it mentioned, but again, with SAC or SAP Analytics Cloud, the old days with something like BPC, I want a new version, I want to build scenario, or ring IT, and I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and before we know it, we're 3 weeks down the line, and we're not doing event-based planning, we're just reacting and going through the process again. I think, again, the use of version management in SAC and the ability, the agility to make changes, on the fly, master data on the fly, input percentages very easily. It is working. It is allowing, and again, at the same customer who's very, senior guys are very interactive with SAC. The financial controller is using version management. He's copied his own data into his private version, made the changes, and then he's gone back and he's presenting it to his finance team. So he's now challenging down, and it's never ever seen that type of behavior before with something like BPC, where it wasn't in the user's control. And some of the other trends, I think I have mentioned, but I'll mention again, the interest in predictive. Again, not again, how are people using it? First of all, often as a baseline. So we create a predictive sales baseline, and then commercial teams change it. But it's also being used as a validation measure. People are submitting their overhead P&L budgets, and then someone in the center is running a predictive model and challenging their submissions. And it's just helping to automate that process. And I think what I want the next phase is to talk about outcomes. As I said, we've got one use where a company has looked at all its payment profiles of invoices and is predicting the probability of an invoice of a customer paying an invoice late, and then is using their challenging in their AR teams to focus on the high risk predictive outcomes. So again, predicting late payments rather than actually waiting for the payment to become late. So I think that's quite an exciting, and again, area. Just one, I'm rattling off because I'm full of it. I'm very passionate.
No, but you have time. Don't worry. Let's see. I think this is interesting. Let's see, to get some practical examples. So don't worry. Let's see. We have time.
And again, it's a bit of a given, this one, and I hope I can explain it. But live or planning and reporting in the same SAC story, and I think it gets missed. So I input, and I'll give you an example of the payroll model. I've loaded my payroll assumptions up, and the user is just inputting their headcount numbers, and the pay gets calculated. And the old way, that would have been in a spreadsheet, and maybe we run some logic, and then we have to open up a report and then try and evaluate it. In SAC, it's all there, and it's not, you input your headcount, and then I go into the other tab, and I see a dashboard, and my headcount's updated, my payroll's updated, and I can run another version and scenario analysis. So I like to call it live planning and reporting. I'm inputting my plan, I'm changing my plan, and I'm seeing the results straight away. I'm not going to open a spreadsheet or going somewhere else. And then once I've got that, this brings us on to the collaboration. I can share it with my other team members. And I hope I've explained that well, but you couldn't do that on legacy-based systems. The process was very disjointed and usually involved email and sending files and and version control. So this ability to input numbers, see the results, and share the numbers without any paper trail or email trail is very, very powerful. And this has led to, we're going to say it, but the planning process is speeding up. No one's accepting a 3-month budgeting process where the budget's out of date before you've started. But these tools, are really, really helping that. I think it's all around, again, the XP&A story, extended planning and analysis, because we can collaborate and we can crowdsource a plan. Accessibility, I know I'm talking to my business partners. I'm not just talking to finance, and it's a finance budget, but I'm using the tools to talk to sales and the commercial teams. And it's a nice tool. It's easy. It's the web interface is simple. People in sales can get to it, through mobile, a device, or straight to the cloud. And it's nice. It looks nice, and it's simple. So that collaboration is helping us to expand to, and I'm speaking more and more. This week I was speaking to one customer. It's not just finance, but operations are in there, marketing are in there. The tool is becoming a much wider appeal. When I used to speak BBC, it would just be to finance. So that it has really changed. I think that's really where the business content comes in. Again, business content helps us to deploy quickly, shows best practice. What I love about it gives me ideas. I go to business content and I can see how other companies are doing it, but it provides ideas. I take it to design workshops and I show customers, well, this is how it can work. Now, how what changes do we need to make? So that power of the business content in terms of reducing costs, quick to deploy, but importantly for me, showing best practice and showing ideas is fantastic. And again, as a consulting partner, creating business content for us has speeded up hugely. I can pull together, proofs of concepts very, very quickly with this tool. So it is, again, back to, we use it. It's an agile tool. I've spoken, a lot about what it can do. SAC, what it can do, what probably the traditional tools can't do. But I do, a couple of messages I want to finish on as well. It is about finance ownership and self-service. And 10 years ago we were moving away from IT to ownership for finance. But again, I think this has moved us on again. More and more companies don't even have an IT function to talk to. You're speaking more to finance. And I think, again, we go in, and the way we sell this, for example, is, it is about self-service. And they say, well, who's going to write the reports? And I always say, we want you to write the reports. It's a self-service tool. If you're not doing it, you're not owning the system. And again, we've changed our approach there. It is a very easy tool to use, not just from reporting, but again, maybe further down the journey. I talk about SAC as data mod, not as an FP&A tool so often, but as a data modeling tool. Predictive tool. I want people creating their own data models, their own predictions, and I think that that will come. So it's very much about finance ownership or business ownership and self-service. So I just want to. I'm nearly there now, but I just want to leave. My last thought really is it's not just an FP&A tool; it's for the whole company, and that's for sell. And finance often may struggle to justify the investment, but this is the all functions. And I think as an approach in the beginning, as customers, you should think big and think where are we going with this tool. But again, implement process by process. So you may start with your budget process, you then may move on to workforce, and it can't, you don't have to do everything on a first day, but do it process by process and expand the footprint and really sweat the investment. And those licenses will seem very good value if we expand, the footprint across the organization.
Right,
Thank
Simon.
You.
No,
Sorry,
that's
you got a lot in there, and I could have gone on.
That's good. Let's see. There's and I'm sure you can go on. And actually, I'd love you to go on. But perhaps let's say we can open up for some questions. Let's say from the audience. Let's say for yourself, but also for Lars, Chris, Suraj, or even myself. I'd really like to open up for questions. So Taurus, I guess we can unmute. Or people can unmute themselves basically to get this discussion going.
Yeah, great discussions, guys. So if you guys have any specific questions for any of our panelists, please raise your hand and I will call on you to unmute your line, or you can type your question here in the chat. If there's anybody that would like to unmute their line, just let me know.
And the first question is always the most difficult. So maybe I can shoot it. Just let's say, because of course we're talking about, let's say, P&L in most of the cases about group profitability, for instance, as you mentioned, Suraj. Like these days, of course, working capital is also crucial. Let's say, do we have any content or let's say predictive scenarios in that space which are coming out of the box? Anybody wants to take it, let's say, and how we approach this? Because, well, I've heard we do. So I don't know whether we're gonna, let's say, detail it out somehow.
Maybe I can start it off and then
all good.
Can put some input. So what's very important is when you're talking about cash flow, liquidity, and those type of scenarios, my starting point is, first of all, where is this data coming from? And the great thing with SAP and our end-to-end finance processes and the data foundation we talked about, cash management is available to us, right? So firstly, our inflows, our outflows, whatever is happening from a cash and liquidity perspective is available. So the great thing is we got our base. Now we talked about our real-time integration processes. So I can get this historic view and what's happening at a point in time over to my planning processes. And what can we do next, right? What can we do next? We provide some very powerful capabilities in Analytics Cloud. So I think everyone here mentioned things like analytical capability, Analytics Cloud, together with predictive, etc. And how powerful would this be for you, firstly, to be able to bring your liquidity information all the way through into Analytics Cloud and say, right, so how do we want to learn it forward? And utilizing the predictive capability in the tool, right? To then start saying, well, I have real-time information coming in from my liquidity and cash management processes. And now let me leverage that together with, firstly, let's say my predictive algorithms pre-delivered within Analytics Cloud. So very business user driven, as Simon mentioned. So therefore, giving that powerful capability from a treasury perspective. And what you can also then do is overlay this with human intelligence. And this is where we've now delivered what we would call as best practices around liquidity in that space. I'm not sure if anyone else has some more input on the liquidity best practices that we have as well. Just checking. Yeah, I think. Hope that makes sense. But yeah, it's really that's just one of the areas where we pick this. And what we can see is in all the different areas within finance. So this was an example of cash management and a treasury perspective. We have some level of best practices in all the different areas. Another one that was mentioned by Simon around predictive forecasting of payments and customer payments and accounts receivable. That's another area where we've done innovation. So my point here is not purely around just FP&A or XP&A. There's a lot more that can be done here, and that's the power of the capability.
Okay. Well, I've got a question for the panelists. If there's somebody in our audience right now that hasn't started, doesn't know where to start, what advice would you give them on how to get started, and what they need to do and what skill set they need to upskill?
Yeah, I could certainly start that. I mean, from a skill set point of view, it is very much, you know, someone has to invest some time on the toolset SAP Analytics Cloud, but it is very much a you know, a self-service tool, and you know, to create reports, you know, data models and logics. Generally, what we would say to that, we you know, there are some fine courses available for SAP online, most of them free, but it is, you know, it just requires someone. It's not IT. It's definitely not an IT resource, but you know, a strong a person with an aptitude, you know, for planning in Excel, for example. Yeah, a strong FP&A person would be able to fly with this tool very quickly. Now, in terms of getting started, I would still, you know, don't start with the technology. It's very much, and don't look at replicating what you've got. But you know, our approach generally is, yeah, we always also show us your existing processes, but tackle it from a process and a pain point of view of what you're trying to address. And again, I say look at the big picture, but really this can be, you know, it's not always possible, but this can be quick to deploy, and it can resolve a pain very quickly. So try and, you know, think almost process by process on what you want to tackle. It may, you know, sometimes that's impossible, especially if you're doing integrated planning. You can't just do sales, but you know, you can get some very early wins quickly with the product, and it does support, you know, going from process to process on your journey within the cloud, rather than doing everything at once. But start process and pains, I would definitely, rather than actually technology.
And maybe if I just give an SAP a view on that as well, is for Analytics Cloud Planning, we have our experience SAC area. So if you've not touched SSC before, you can go in there and it takes you through the whole approach of the capability and understanding as a guided approach on what the tools capabilities. So I think that's quite important. And just an experience from my side, one of my customers I'm working with did that as an initial experience point, and they utilized some of our open SAP courses available. And this person, within 2 weeks that I was, this person within the Office of Finance I was talking to, so not technical, is from the business, in 2 weeks came back to me discussing models and discussing how structures were being set up in Analytics Cloud. And I was like, that's what you say, wow, right? That is amazing, because how easy and simple it is to get onboarded is where the power of Analytics Cloud comes to life.
Definitely, yeah.
And if I can add to that, we also have what we call Technical Academy. So if you want to experience how SAC would behave, we can also accommodate for, say, a half day or a day workshop where in a secured environment, we can take you through various concepts hands-on. So it's really a hands-on experience. And a funny anecdote, I ran one of these courses a little while ago, and I got the response back from the customer, can this environment be extended for a week, because I built something and I want to show it to my CFO. So that's how excited that customer became when really getting hands-on with the system. And it's free of charge, by the way.
Awesome, guys. Anybody else have a question for our panelists? We still have about 15 minutes. If you want to take advantage of the opportunity.
Taurus, Lars here. Can I just add about the best practices content? And that includes both the planning model and logic and the visualizations for each planning process in the best practices content. So the margin planning is connected to the P&L planning, for example, and it's connected to the balance sheet planning and the cash flow planning. So it's a rather strong concept around the best practices content.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else that has any questions for our panelists? So maybe I have another question for our panelists. What's one use case that sticks out in your mind that might make sort of a big difference in our participants here that you've experienced over the last little while? And this goes to any one of you on the panel.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's a very quick, and I've mentioned it. It's version management with strategic planning, the ability just to, for people to look at their strategic plan over 5 years, beginning with a budget or a forecast, and just the time and the ease in which they can copy data and amend data and have multiple scenarios and flex their strategic plans. So, one, you copy the scenario, but, with value driver trees, for example, you can change your drivers within that plan. And for me, that was doable with a legacy planning system, but would have taken a lot of configuration, where so much of this comes almost, out of a box and in a self-service approach.
Okay.
A scenario which comes like and that's a practical example from a couple of years back, actually. I was in discussion with a food producing company, and they were making ready-made lasagnas as one of their products, right? And actually what they wanted to do, because they were always coming into trouble with the meat, let's say the minced meat that they put in their lasagnas. Basically, they couldn't get it from their normal supplier. They need to get it from somebody else. Actually, it was another type of meat, which basically needed to cook for 10 minutes longer, basically, so that in their production process, it was changing away let's say the approach, but also the production costs, let's say from a raw material cost perspective, but also from an activity cost perspective, and then from an energy cost perspective. And actually they say, well, SAP, please help me in simulating what the impact would be if we select vendor 1, vendor 2, or vendor 3 as an alternative, and basically how to trade this off. That's basically what we call product cost simulation for existing production processes. So it's not really the standard costing piece which we do in the ERP system itself. And that's basically even provided nowadays, such a scenario with the content that Suraj was talking about as part of the IFP content. Now, like at the moment that I was talking to that organization, we couldn't. And actually for them, it was a decisive factor to even go away from their selection of SAP ERP because it was so crucial for them. Like say, if I put that into the context of today, let's say with, for instance, in Europe, let's say a heavy, let's say lifting on the energy prices and the ability to, let's say, simulate this, I think it can help a lot of organizations. So it, of course, it's not strategic planning. It's not really XP&A end to end, but it's a very practical use case, which might, let's say, be interesting to basically translate into your own context, into your own situation. So that's one I immediately had to think of, Toros. I don't know, Lars, Chris, Suraj, you want to add one?
It's not exactly a specific use case, but what always amazes me is the reaction we get when explaining how business rules are being set up and the visual way in which it actually happens. It's not scripting at all.
No.
It's really like what you would do in Excel, creating formulas. And that is really very powerful because a business user is the master of his own house, so to speak. They can set up these business rules in a drag and drop environment, so to speak, and put them to life right away in the specific models that are being constituted.
Mhm.
And that goes across multiple use cases, I would say.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
Yep. Anyone else want to chime in?
Maybe one topic that's continuously coming my way with customers I'm working with is around when we're talking about the concept of XP&A, especially from a supply chain planning standpoint, interacting with finance. How are you financializing supply chain processes, right? Oh God, it's a daily topic. And we've got some very powerful stuff happening with Analytics Cloud Planning together with processes. How are we integrating process, right? So when we talk about value and volume metrics and how we're bringing that into the financialization process, how it's touching your COGS and your P&L, very, very important. And we've done some very powerful work there. Maybe then predicting as part of that, your COGS, right? So be it your discounts and rebates, etc. How do we take historic data? How do we take what's coming from supply chain and financialize it, but also push it all the way through to having a very robust plan? And that's part of what we call as some of the innovation we're doing around XP&A as a framework, right? So there's a lot of stuff happening with SAP, with our partners, with our customers, but I think that's a very hot area. So something to just make sure everyone's aware of and some very powerful things you can bring to life within the business.
Extending to the sales planning, infusing it with predictive.
Yeah.
Actually, that's also happening at SAP. And the beauty of it is it strips the plan process from all emotions. It takes away sandbagging to a large degree because it's looking at historical figures and projecting that forward. So that never seems to amaze me, ceases to amaze me when we have these kinds of discussions with customers.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, thanks for that, guys. If there's anybody that has any questions that have popped up in their minds, now's the time to ask your question or type your question in the chat. We have a couple more minutes. Anybody would like to ask a question? I don't see anything in the chat. Okay, so to bring everything home, guys, just in 25 words or less, what's the key takeaway that you'd like to leave with our participants today, as we sign off and everybody continues with their day? Maybe we start with Chris. So 25 words or less. Key takeaway.
3, holistic business steering, because that's what it's all about.
Okay. How about you, Simon?
It's not just an FP&A tool, and think big.
Okay. Lars?
Yeah, I would say self-service around SAC, and in combination with the S4 data structure, I think the ownership of decision support process will really be owned on the business side, the group controlling and so forth going forward. And I think that will speed up the use of decision information in a systematic way going forward.
Suraj?
My view would be the intelligent enterprise concept is here. You can bring that transformation to life. We have real customer examples and real approaches behind how we can help you get there. So explore it and work with our partners in SAP, and we're very, very keen to do that with our customers. I think that's my view.
Okay, and Michelle?
I think it would be, let's say, from a technology angle, the modular finance platform, and it's going beyond finance, as Simon was mentioning, because that really outperforms our classic mindset of, let's say, ERP versus EPM tooling. Now it's all there together based on a single data model that every business user can really understand. That's it.
Okay. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Simon, Lars, Chris, Suraj, and Michelle, for a great session, great interactive session. A lot of great information. Hopefully, everyone in our audience has had an opportunity to digest a lot of this and hopefully maybe raise a couple of new questions. I've put everybody's contact information in the chat. Please do reach out to our topic experts if you have any questions for any of them. I've also put in the links to some of the upcoming webinars as well. If you're interested, please do reach back out to us, and we'll definitely guide you in the right direction with this. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know it's not that easy to take a couple of hours off from your day-to-day activities to join us. Thank you again for taking that time. And with that, I'd like to wish you guys a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're located. Thank you so much, and talk to you in the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.